All right, so look, I wanted to talk about the alchemy of burnout and depression and how the soul turns pain into power. You see, burnout and depression aren't just a mental health crisis, but there's something more. They're also a spiritual threshold into higher consciousness or madness. Just depends on which way you go with it. The best way you can think of it is your burnout and depression is like a alchemical fire, you know what I mean? That could either forge you into your higher self, or it can burn you to a crisp, you know what I mean? It could destroy you. It could turn you into the villain. You know what I mean? But you have to realize that burnout is your soul's rebellion against a false life purpose. You know what I mean? There's a part of your essence, of your very nature, that rejects all this shit. Even if you try to keep it together and fake the funk, your essence knows this shit ain't right. And depression is not just sadness, it's the death of meaning. So as these two things are happening, your burnout and depression, as your soul is rebelling against a false life purpose, and in your depression, you're losing this feeling, this sense of meaning, this is the breakdown phase. This is when the mask starts to slip. This is when the reality comes out. This is when the ego cracks and you are exposed to who and what you really are. But not just you, everything around you. Because when you're in that depression, all the illusions start to fade away. That realistic or sometimes even pessimistic view, you see things for what they are. There's no more bullshit. There's no more hype. You see it for what it is. And the burnout, it's the same thing, but for yourself. You realize your limitations. You realize you can't go on forever. You realize that, there's only so much you can do. You know what I mean? So it's in this breakdown phase and this mental collapse where you're pulled inward into the underworld of your own psyche. You're pulled down into the deeps, the primordial waters of your own mind. And that's where the changes start to happen. So in this descent into the darkness, into the blackness of yourself, you are faced with your shadow self, the version of yourself that you have been avoiding, that exists inside of you. But because you were too busy doing whatever the fuck, you ignored it. But now that you see things for what they are, and you're not spending all your attention being distracted by the exterior and you're forced to look within, you see that version of you that's been there the whole time in the dark. In this darkness, the deeper you go, the shadow version of you starts to assume more and more control. You know what I mean? And this is when people become villains. It's not always that people are necessarily evil. It's that some people, when that breakdown, when that collapse inward happens, that shadow version is so intense, has so much energy, that at a certain point, it starts to take over. And they lose themselves in the darkness of their own mind. If you really think about it, the villain is just a healer that never got the healing that they needed. You know what I mean? That's why they act that way. That's why villains act that way. Sometimes the villain is just a healer that never got the healing that they needed. But here's the thing. While you were in this darkness, that's where the change happens. That's where the transformation happens. It might help if you think of the burnout and depression, instead of just like this black void, think of it more of like a black fire. And the key, the point of it, isn't to run from the fire or to run from the blackness or to run from your shadow self. The point of it is to acknowledge it, embrace it, integrate with it, understand it, because you need the balance of the light and the darkness. You just can't avoid it. And if you try to avoid it, your emphasis on the light is going to magnify the darkness, and then you become the villain. So rather than try to escape the darkness, you got to mine it for truth, for answers, for revelations, for understanding, for peace. Look, even at a certain level of consciousness, the villain, when seen with love, becomes a prophet. You know what I mean? It's about the perception. The point is, when you face your own darkness with a certain type of sacred intention, you don't just survive. You transmute, you transform, you evolve. So These are things you got to keep in mind if you're somebody who is burned out or in a state of depression. Instead of thinking that you're broken, think of it as an initiation, because you're not broken. This is an initiation. This is an opportunity to evolve. But the key is you have to let the fire forge you, not consume you. You know what I mean? The path is painful, but it's not punishment. It's alchemy. You are not your burnout. You are a soul on fire, becoming something divine.